The Telltale Heart. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous, I admit. And am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses. Not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all, was a sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then can you say that I am mad? Hearken and observe. How healthily, how calmly, I can tell you the whole story. It's impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object. There was none. Passion. There was none. I loved the old man. He'd never done me wrong. He'd never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes. It was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. And whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad? Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, at about midnight, I would turn the latch of his door and open it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had an opening sufficient enough for my head, I put in a dark lantern, closed, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. You would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly. Very, very slowly. So as not to disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to get my head so far within the room that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? No. And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern, cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. But I undid it just so much, until a single thin, dim ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I always found the eye closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into his room, spoke courageously to him, calling him by name and inquiring in a warm and hearty tone how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at midnight, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own power, of my sagacity. I could hardly contain my feelings of triumph to think there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he hardly to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and I assume he heard me, for he sprang up on the bed, as if startled, and cried out, "Who's there?" Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on. Steadily. I had my head in the room. I was about to undo the lantern when my thumb slipped on the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up from his bed and cried out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. And in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down either. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. And presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. Oh, I knew the sound well. Many a night just at midnight, as all the world had slept, that sound has welled up in my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echoes the tears that distracted me. I say I knew the sound well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled it hard. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had stirred in his bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. Oh, he had tried to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had said to himself, "It is the wind in the chimney, and it is a mouse crossing the floor. It is a cricket which has made but a single chirp." Yes! He tried to comfort himself with these suppositions, but found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. I say I knew the sound well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him. When I had waited a very long time, very patiently, and without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very little crevice in the lantern, so I did. You cannot imagine how stealthily. Until, at length, a single thin dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out of the crevice, fell upon the vulture eye. It was open. Wide open! And I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it all in perfect distinction. All a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damn spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of the senses? I say to you now, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew this sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart, and it increased my fury like the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier to courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I tried how steadily I could to maintain the ray upon the eye, but meanwhile the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder and louder. The old man's stare must have been extreme. It grew louder. I say louder every minute. And do you mark me well? I've told you that I'm nervous. And so I am. And now I say at the dead hour of the night, amidst the dreadful silence of that old house, such a strange noise as this drove me to uncontrollable terror. But for many minutes I refrained. But the heart beat on. But then a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern. I leaped into the room. He shrieked once. Once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the ground. I then pulled the heavy bed on top of him and smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But the heart beat on for many minutes with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. After many minutes, the beating ceased. The old man was dead? I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes! He was stone dead. I placed my hand upon his chest, held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer. When I describe for you the wise precautions I took for concealment of the body, the night waned. But I worked hastily and in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, the arms, the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited it all between the scatlings. I then replaced the board so carefully, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could detect anything wrong. There was nothing to clean up. There was no stain of any kind, no blood spot, whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had cut off. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock. Still dark as midnight. And as the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. And I went down to open it with a light heart. For what had I now to fear? There entered into the room 3 gentlemen who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the law. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the deputies, had been deputed to search the premise. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentlemen welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own from a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them in here to rest from your fatigues. While I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very seat in which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I began to feel myself getting pale, and I wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing, it became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I spoke more freely to rid myself of the feeling, but the noise, it continued and gained definitiveness. Until at length I found the sound was not from within my own ears. I gasped for breath, but the officer showed it not. I spoke more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in the high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, and I raved, and I swore, and I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise, it arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, and louder, and louder. And still the officers chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no. No, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This, I thought, and this, I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer, and I felt that I must scream or die. And hark! Again! Louder! 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 Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks here! It is the beating of the old man's heart! Thank you.